Hey up lads, hey up loves, it's the Yorkshireman again, and we're going on to our third James O'Brien video now, where Mr O'Brien, old Jobby, the troll, is going to be talking to Mr Nigel Farage, the ex-leader of the UK Independence Party, also known as UKIP. Now, before we start, I'll just say about Nigel Farage. I don't think, a bit like Trump, that he is the monster that everybody makes him out to be. Again, people tend to slap him the label of Hitler, and I really don't think that's the case. I don't think that the man is Hitler. I think he was just a politician, like all of them. The only difference is that he's got a bit of the businessman mixed in there, plus a bit of the guy who you see down the pub in his suit after work with a fag and a pint of beer. Now, some people hate Mr Farage, some people love him. He's a very Marmite figure. But one of the things that you certainly can say about him is that he has got a little bit of an obsession with migrants, immigrants, foreigners, and also with the European Union. Now, that's not to say that that's necessarily a negative thing, but people assume, therefore, that because he talks about that a lot of the time and he cares a lot about this country, that that somehow makes him a racist. Now, that is a whole other conversation that we can have if you want me to. But for now, we're just going to concentrate on this particular exchange that he has with James O'Brien. And I'm sure we all know what James O'Brien's going to think of him. But let's have a look, shall we?
You've mentioned your discomfort at listening to foreign languages on a train recently.
I made the point that I got on a train and went for several stops and there were a lot of people around me and no one spoke English. And I thought, you know, this is... I didn't say I didn't object to it. I felt slightly uncomfortable. And I think, actually, isn't that the problem? Isn't this, of all the countries in Europe, the most accepting, the most tolerant?
You said, I don't feel very comfortable in that situation. You did say you had a problem.
I didn't feel comfortable, no.
Yes.
So they're talking here about foreign languages being spoken in public. Now, one thing I will agree with Mr Farage on here is that, yes, this country is one of the most accepting and one of the most tolerant. We've got lots and lots of different people from all over the world who live here, and we have what we could call our multicultural society, where lots of different cultures exist and live side by side, most of the time in harmony. James is questioning him on the fact that he felt uncomfortable listening to foreign languages when he was on a train. Now, for me personally, hearing other languages doesn't bother me at all, because a lot of the time I'm in a world of my own or I'm listening to me music. And even if I was listening to other languages, would it bother me? Probably not. But if you sat round a table or you were on a train carriage and everybody was speaking foreign languages, then you might feel a little bit uncomfortable, because we as a species, we like to know what's going on around us. And if you can't understand what people are saying, then you're going to feel like you're missing something or you're being left out, and you might instinctively feel a little bit uncomfortable. Now, does that mean anything's going to happen? Probably not. But I can understand somebody feeling a little bit uncomfortable, especially in their own country when they're hearing all these different languages. But I think that most people would just pass it off and not even give it a second thought. But I get the sneaking suspicion that James O'Brien isn't going to see it that way. I think he's ready with his stamps and his labels in his pocket, ready to whip them out and give them to Mr Farage. But let's watch, shall we?
Your wife is a German speaker.
Well, my children are too, yeah.
Does that make you feel uncomfortable?
No, because they can speak English, and the whole point about
How do you know those people couldn't?
Well, maybe they could, but I got the distinct feeling that it certainly wasn't their language of choice. And if you look at the primary school situation in the East End of London, you know, where you've now got schools where a majority don't speak English, doesn't that say...
No, you've got schools...
Nothing classier than bringing somebody's family into it. But, to be fair, I can see why he's doing it. He's trying to make this comparison. But, as is said here, they do speak a foreign language, but they also speak English. And I think that when you have people who come and live in another country, like I personally would not go and live in another country if I could not speak the language, even just a bit. It's a different thing when you go on holiday and you have your phrase book and you think, well, I'm only here for 2 weeks, I don't really need to keep this forever. But if I were going to live there, I would certainly learn the lingo, because it helps you to integrate better. And when you have people who don't even speak English, and I know from when I used to work as a postman, sometimes you'd go to houses and people would not speak English, and it creates a barrier. So how are people supposed to integrate? How are we supposed to become this brilliant multicultural society if people are stopped by the simplest of things, like speaking the language? Now, he also makes the point here about the schools, and I will say that I have also worked in schools up in the north, and some schools you go to, all of the pupils and even all of the staff, most of them are not English speakers, certainly not when it comes to their first language. And again, how does this help us with integration and multiculturalism when you have people who stick to their own communities and their own languages and they don't even attempt to mix or learn? And I understand if there are people who have come from abroad and they don't know anybody, but there's somebody over here who can speak their language and they have a bit in common, who are they likely to want to hang around with? But it doesn't help, and it's not necessarily the fault of the people, it's the fault of the government and the councils for not creating a situation and an environment where people can integrate properly. But again, going back to the thing of being a bit uncomfortable, I understand it. A lot of it is just down to ignorance, and not ignorance in the negative sense, ignorance in the sense of the meaning of the word. In fact, I'll get it up here. Ignorance. Noun, mass noun, lack of knowledge or information. That is all that ignorance means. So the lack of information you've got is you don't know the language.
Doesn't that say to us that what we want is a sensible, balanced immigration policy where we want people with skills to come into Britain, but we also want integration in society.
Of course we do. And the schools you refer
happening.
to, the pupils you refer to, are registered and recorded as having English as a second language. They're not registered and recorded as not being able to speak English. That's precisely that sort
and
of...
some of both.
Well, yes, but no one's counted them, so your own children would fit into that category.
Well, hopefully, lots of people can speak different languages, but the point I'm making is, do we want to live in an integrated society?
No, forgive me.
No, forgive me, because I'm going to interrupt you. What he's saying there is, as far as I can see, pretty straightforward. I don't think there's anything wrong with people wanting to have a sensible immigration policy. I don't think it's wrong that people want the best to come to Britain, although I also have an argument that there should be more done to make sure that people can get all of the benefits in education and opportunities in their own countries as well as just coming over here, because otherwise the countries that they're leaving will suffer because the best of the best end up leaving and those countries will stay at a certain level. But that's another argument for another time. Also, again, he makes the point there of integration, and I think it is a very important thing. If we want to live in a multicultural society, as so many people apparently want to do, then I think it's probably a good thing integration preparation is done and it's there so that when people do come to live in this country, it'll help them fit in better, get work quicker, mix with their communities, and ultimately get along a lot better in Britain.
The point you're making is that schools in the East End are full of children who can't speak English. I just want you to recognise that's not true, what you just said.
Could I just ask a question? When was the last time that James O'Brien went round the schools in the East End and actually saw it for himself? When was the last time James O'Brien got out of that chair and went round the East End, let alone the schools? Maybe you should try doing that, James. Oh, actually, no, don't do that, because a fella like you hanging round schools might raise a few eyebrows. And when I say people like you, I mean champagne socialists. That's the last thing they need in the East End.
The children who are typified as speaking English as a second language would include your own daughters. Their mother tongue being German.
They come from homes where English is most definitely not the first language, and in too many cases is not the language at all. Now look,
but no one's counted how many people are in the second category.
And it would be a very helpful and useful thing if they did, and perhaps we'd be even more surprised and even more shocked. But the argument
or perhaps we'd realise that most bilingual children in this country are children like yours.
Well,
I think what you meant to say there, James, was their mother's tongue, not their mother tongue, because their mother speaks German. But also, she probably speaks English. And it's not the case that in a bilingual household, one parent speaks one language and the other one speaks the other language. But it would be very interesting if anybody could find any figures about children in British schools and the languages they speak and whether or not they're sort of spread out or whether they're all clumped in certain areas. That would be quite telling. Now, I have had friends at school, college and university, and I've been in relationships with people who aren't English, and they all say that the best way of picking up the language is to be around it and hear it and to speak it, where they're put in a situation where they have to, otherwise they won't be able to survive. Now, that's not to say that they still won't want to hang around with lots of people who also speak their language. That's understandable, because that's basically like if you went to a job and at the end of the day you come home and relax, because talking another language is bloody hard work, so they probably just want a bit of chill time to speak with people who also speak their native language. But that's absolutely fine, as long as they're not cutting themselves off and aren't even attempting saying, it's one thing for the grown-ups, but it's another thing altogether for the children, because if they're going to be growing up in this country and becoming British citizens, then they're going to want to make sure that they've got that language in place to help them when it comes to going to school, going to college, going to university, and eventually getting a job and having a family of their own.
Let's turn it around the other way, shall we?
Yes, let's.
Let's talk about immigration. Let's talk about Europe. Let's talk about the European elections. I am making one very simple point. We cannot have any form of managed migration into Britain and remain a member of the European Union because we have an open door to nearly 500 million people. And the argument, James, I'm putting is this. We'd be far better to have an immigration policy that didn't, as it currently does, discriminate against engineers from India or doctors from New Zealand in favour of anybody, regardless of skill levels or backgrounds, coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And that is the great debate. And when Nick Clegg took me on, and I tried to have that debate with him, and he was very reluctant on that particular point to engage. Cameron and Miliband run a country mile away from that debate, and that, I think, is at the heart of our relationship with Europe.
Now, I know that Nigel Farage gets slapped with the label of racist pretty much every time he opens his mouth, but just putting Nigel aside for 1 second, there is nothing, as far as I can see, wrong with that statement. If you want the best Britain that you can get, then obviously you want the best immigration system that you can get. I mean, that's just one of a massive pie of things that we want in order to get this country up and running. I mean, it is pretty good at the moment, don't get me wrong, it's the best it's been for years, but there are lots and lots of problems that we have to address, and immigration is one of them. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, we want to make sure that that system is in place so that we can get good people who want to come and work, who want to come and contribute, who want to be part of society. But also, I think there's the argument to be made for making sure that they're then good enough to go back and help their own countries so that their countries can grow and we can all grow together, right? But the people on the far left and the establishment, the people like the Milibands and the Camerons and the Cleggs, who don't like any dissent from their little thing that they've got going on, they're going to make Nigel Farage out to be the worst possible human being that you can imagine. And it's funny how a lot of the people who say they go against the government, they eat it up. They eat everything up. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people in UKIP who aren't exactly the shining beacons of our society, because they're not. There are some people in there who are quite frankly thick as two short planks and fucking stupid. But I don't see how it's a problem to want to have a good, proper immigration system to make sure that legal immigrants haven't got as many hoops to jump through and aren't treated like criminals when they get here, but also that illegal immigrants are not allowed entry and are sent back and dealt with properly, thus saving everybody a lot of trouble in the long run. But also that the asylum seekers, the people who genuinely are fleeing from war and terror, are assessed and dealt with and looked after in the best way possible. So again, whatever you think of Nigel Farage, that's your business. But taking what he said and what he's proposing, I don't really see it as being much of a problem. But again, people like James O'Brien will always turn it round and make it all about the individual.
Indeed, and I mean, if that was the debate that you'd offered to have on this programme, we'd have it now. But
like James O'Brien would ever actually have a proper debate with anybody. Nah. Never happening.
But what the caller asked you was why so many people think you're racist.
And there it is, ladies and gentlemen. He has just pulled the race card. Well, I think I've already explained as to why people like Nigel Farage get slapped with the label of racist. So I won't cover that again, but if you want to hear why, just go back a bit in the video and you'll understand.
Yeah, well, I think, yes, we've had our idiots.
And part of the answer would be you talk about children who can't speak English as a first language without mentioning it includes your own children.
I mean,
right, and that's racism, is it, James? I think, if anything, the closest it would come to would be nepotism, but I won't linger on that. Let's just see what else you've got to say.
What is racism? Is racism between races? I mean, I was talking about.
Don't you know?
How
can you say you're not something if you don't know what it is?
I mean,
Hey, by gum. I think what he was doing there, James, was he was being rhetorical. It's like saying, what is culture? What is art? What is love? I think he knows what a racist is. I think most people know what a racist is, although, to be fair, that word seems to have lost pretty much all of its meaning now because it has been watered down so much to the point where if somebody posts a picture of themselves getting a piggyback off somebody who isn't the same colour as them, people can now legitimately flag that up as racism. But it's really difficult because The thing is, that word is supposed to carry a lot of weight to it, because when there are genuine racists out there, it's the best thing to use against them to point them out for what they are. But when people use it so freely and frivolously, it loses its meaning. So eventually it gets to a point where people start saying, hey, that guy over there or that woman there, they're a racist. And because it gets used so much, you're more likely to think, oh, are they actually racist? Or are you just being a little bit sensitive there? Or are you just misusing that word again?
Is race about colour? Is race about race, or is it about nationality? You know, I made a comment there that wasn't intended to say any more that I felt uncomfortable about the rate and pace of change and numbers of people.
No, you felt uncomfortable about people speaking foreign languages,
yes,
despite the fact that presumably your own wife does when she phones home to Germany.
Yeah, I don't suppose she speaks it on the train, you know. That's
Why
the point
not?
I'm making.
Is she not allowed to? Can't she
of
speak
course
German
people are
wherever she
allowed
wants?
to.
And
Of
what
course
about the
people are
line
allowed
about not wanting to live next door to Romanians? It's perfectly acceptable for
I
people
didn't say
not
that.
to
I
want
was
to...
asked if a group of Romanian men moved in next door to you, would you be concerned?
What about if a group of German children did?
I'd be thinking the hills are alive with the sound of music, James. I mean, what kind of ridiculous point is that? Now, when it comes to generalising about certain groups of people, I do have a big problem with this. And again, I understand the mechanics that went on in his head when he said that if a group of Romanian men moved next door to you, how would you feel? Now, it's the same in the block of flats where I live. If there was a flat that was just full of men, you would think, oh, what's going on here? It's obviously not a family. What are they going to be doing? Is it going to be parties all night? Are they going to be having drugs? Are they going to be drinking? Are they going to be loud? Are they going to be boisterous? Are they going to be messy? Take them on face value and then maybe try getting to know them a bit. But again, I can understand how some people might feel a bit uncomfortable if a quote-unquote nuclear family moved down the street from you or moved into the block of flats with you. But you can't really put it all on one group of people. You may notice cultural patterns or social patterns, things like that. But again, you have to treat people as individuals rather than putting them in your little boxes.
What's the difference?
The difference, and you know what the difference
No,
is.
I honestly don't. This is, I think, where the disconnect
Well, we
is
have
between your position and mine. What is the difference?
We want an immigration policy based on controlling not just quantity but quality as well. And we have a problem that and unfortunately, those communist countries which I visited, and I visited the Roma encampments, and I've seen the real poverty that people live in, and we talk about exclusion in society. Go and see, since the fall of communism, what has happened to the Roma communities in those countries. They don't get jobs, they get nowhere to live, and they have been forced, in many cases, to a life of crime.
Now, speaking from experience here, I have been to parts of Europe where certainly the standards of living are not as good as they are over here, and certainly there is a lot more quote-unquote poverty. And in those environments where there is more poverty, in fact, in general, in places where there is more poverty, people are going to be running the risk or be more likely of going towards the more criminal way of life than the straight edge way of life, just because a lot of the time it's the only way that they can make money, and it's understandable. It's not right, but it's understandable. And old habits can die hard, which is why we need proper background checks when it comes to immigration to make sure that the kinds of people who may be coming from countries where there are higher levels of poverty are going to be honest, law-abiding citizens. And again, it's not to tar them all with the same brush, because there are probably people living within those impoverished societies who want to make a better life for themselves and for their families, and we need to make sure that these systems are in place so that they're the people who get given priority, and the people who have criminal records or who are more likely to commit crimes or terrible acts aren't just let in. Could we all just not agree on that one thing at least?
What has happened with an open door is it's been an open invitation for the traffickers. Now, we all know this is going on.
Okay.
The Metropolitan Police
Trafficking is a crime, of course.
Trafficking is a crime.
And trafficked people are victims of crime.
Yes, that's right, James. Trafficking is a crime, and the people who are trafficked are also victims of crime, because a lot of the time they give their life savings or everything they've got in the hope that they're going to get ferried across into the land of opportunity, i.e. Europe, by these people who are taking advantage of them. But, James, if they are still trying to get into this country illegally, then it's still illegal, no matter whether they've been victimised or not. However, if the systems are better, then these people will be able to migrate properly and claim asylum properly, and then the traffickers won't be able to take advantage of them, will they? And also, just to point out, the people who are being trafficked may not be honest, decent people themselves. They may also be criminals themselves, which again is why we need a proper immigration system to stop this kind of thing happening. Now, while I keep going on about having a proper immigration system, I know that Britain and Europe do have immigration systems in place already, but clearly there are massive big holes in them that need fixing. And one of the things, I'm sorry to have to drag it back to Brexit, one of the things that drove people to vote leave in the referendum was because of immigration. And maybe, just maybe, if our great leaders were doing their jobs properly and making sure that all of these things were in place, perhaps we'd be singing a slightly different tune now, but we are where we are.
Yes, and the Metropolitan Police have produced their crime statistics and they're eye-watering, and I'm saying, let's get a grip on it.
I know you're saying that about Romanians, but why can't you understand how many people feel troubled that you're also talking about them? 32 million people are looking for jobs in Europe, and that big clunking fist pointing, saying that they're
That was
coming.
a provocative poster.
They're coming for your job. That frightens people.
Well,
people who are already here working.
well, sadly.
People who my children go to school with. Their parents are troubled by the idea that they're now being demonised and typified.
So, I can only assume that the poster that James O'Brien's talking about here is the one with the masses of migrants that were walking across Europe from the Middle East, and Nigel Farage was standing in front of it, pointing at it. Well, just to put a little bit of a spin on this for you, Jobby, is the people who are probably feeling scared are the people who see these masses of people walking across their countries like an army and thinking, what the bloody hell's going on here? They also probably feel a little bit nervous when the government apparently doesn't seem to do anything about it, or when the law enforcement or border control agencies aren't doing anything about it either. It probably feels very intimidating. Now, I'm sure that people don't feel intimidated or scared at the idea of foreign people or immigrants coming to work and coming to live in their country. But when you have that many people all going in one direction, looking like an army, and also, what do you think they're doing, James? They're not coming on a jolly holiday, are they? They're coming across because they probably, like you say, are looking for jobs, and there's only so many jobs to go around. But in case you haven't noticed, something that Mr O'Brien here is doing brilliantly is the thing that he's accusing Nigel Farage of doing. He's putting all foreigners and all immigrants into one box and saying, you're speaking about all of them. And I'll just tell you, there's a difference between millions of people walking from the Middle East and somebody from Spain who wants to come and work in London or Manchester or Leeds. I think we can all agree that there's a big difference between that and huge armies of people walking all the way across Europe.
Demonising anybody.
But you just asked you a question about Romanians and you started talking about people traffickers.
I'm demonising a political class that has allowed us to have an open door to allow things like this to happen.
Okay, so when I say Romanian and you start talking about people traffickers, why didn't you say people are perfectly entitled to feel uncomfortable about living next door to people traffickers, wherever they're from? Why do you say Romanians?
I didn't say Romanians. I was asked a question. If a group of Romanian men moved in next to you, would you be concerned? And if you lived in London, I think you would be.
Yes.
Yes, clearly not fucking interested. So if we can just finally clear that up, he didn't say Romanians. He was asked, if a group of Romanian men moved next door to you in London, how would you feel? And he answered the question. However he answered it, you can take that however you want. And I'll go over what I said before. If there was an house next to you, or a flat next to you, and a group of men, whoever they were, moved in next to you, how would you feel about it? I'm sure maybe if you went to speak to them, you'd feel alright, or maybe you wouldn't be, but I'm pretty sure it's got nothing to do with your race or your nationality. I'm sure you'd probably feel very different if it was a group of women, or a group of old people, or possibly even a group of Dungeons and Dragons players. One thing I'm sure you'd be shitting bricks about is if it was a group of Yorkshiremen who moved in next to you. You think, oh, shitting hell, there goes the neighbourhood.
It's reported this morning, Nigel, that you pulled out of an interview on London Live because there was no makeup artist.
What a load of rubbish.
That's what I thought.
Sorry. That's what I thought
you
can accuse me of many things, but not that.
Well, and bring it back to the light-hearted stuff again. Ha ha ha, all jokes and fun, innit?
Well, I've tried to, and I'm delighted you're so happy. I'm still utterly unpersuaded as to why you sit on a party with the leader of the Italian Lega Nord, a member of the Anders Breivik fan club.
Now, the person who he's talking about here is somebody called Mario Borghezio, who is part of Lega Nord, which is an Italian political party, and he has said things about Anders Breivik. Now, this is a whole horrible can of worms which I'm not even going to attempt to open, and I don't care what anybody's political persuasion is or however they feel, what their personal or religious or social beliefs are. If you have to murder somebody to make your point, then you are scum. And that is the end of that. But I'm going to stand by my word here and say that I don't believe in the idea of guilt by association. I believe in treating people as individuals in the same way that if James O'Brien had been hanging out with some pretty extreme far-left socialist Marxists, I wouldn't judge him because of that. I'd judge him as him, not the people who he was hanging around with. I'd judge them as individuals and I'd judge him as individuals. So I don't really buy that whole argument. But of course, this allows an opportunity for James O'Brien to shoehorn in some more far-right stuff to suit his particular agenda. And, James, really? Is there honestly an Anders Breivik fan club that you know of?
I'm completely I do not understand why you use words like Romanian when describing who you would and would not want to live next door to.
James, we've already covered this. He didn't use the word. Somebody asked him if the group of Romanians moved in next door to him, what would he feel like? Let's just put that one to bed, shall we?
I don't understand why you're uncomfortable listening to foreign languages when your own wife and children speak them, and I don't understand why you talk about problems in primary schools that are caused by children like your own.
And again, I tried to explain earlier about the foreign languages one, but again, I don't think that you're ever going to understand it, James. And again, I just hope that people out there can maybe understand it. Now, the funny thing is that I never thought I would be in a position where I was having to come to the defence of Nigel Farage. I mean, back in 2014, 2013, I was on the bandwagon of people who were just like, oh, he's a racist scumbag. But now, I honestly do not think that anymore. I think that in these particular kinds of conversations, when we're talking about immigration, it can all get very muddy very, very quickly. And what we need really are politicians and people to be sensible enough and mature enough to be able to talk about issues like immigration without resorting to name-calling and accusations of racism. There is a big, big difference between caring about immigration and being a racist. And again, it's not just British people in this country who feel this way about immigration. There are immigrants who feel the same way because they want the immigration to be the best system that it can be, because it benefits them as individuals as well as us, as well as the country. And I can't understand why, after all this time, that we can't just have a proper conversation about this without it just falling into complete disarray. It's very, very depressing. And when you get these unbearable, arrogant leftists like James O'Brien, who are the very people who keep muddying the water, the conversation can never take place. But don't forget, you're not having a conversation with James O'Brien when you're talking to him. You're just there for him to insult and to condescend to and to make himself feel better. Now, there are people who you can talk to who you can disagree with, and then there's people like Jobby the Troll. And I've changed my mind. I wouldn't give a shit if I was living next door to a group of Romanian men or a group of Yorkshiremen. I would be absolutely mortified if James O'Brien moved in next door to me. Imagine asking for a cup of sugar. But let us not forget, the reason that James O'Brien is the way he is because he puts salt on everything. Explains why he's such a salty bastard. Anyway, that's it for part 3. I'll see you again in part 4.